Well, there's three levels of leadership, right? The first level is understanding how to lead yourself, which, by the way, is not easy.
What's shaking? This is All In with Rick Jordan. I'm your host, Rick Jordan. Today, we are going to dive deep for all of you who want to be in business, who want to move beyond that at some point. And before we start, I'm going to ask you to do something. Share this episode with at least 3 people because we like to reach more people. That's the only way that we grow is with your help. Share this out to people that you think will enjoy the content, or even people that you want to piss off if you think they won't enjoy it, whatever. All right, but we're going to rock into this here because today I've got industry influencer, coach, speaker, educator, mentor, and leadership discipler, Thomas Kereszti. Kereszti? Yeah. Hey, what's up, Tom?
Hey, living the dream in Southern California.
Awesome, my man. Yeah, Southern.
Sorry, go ahead.
Southern California. I know we were talking a little bit before the show. I'm like, hey, do I detect a little bit of a New York accent there?
Yeah, well, I got a long journey. I was born in Budapest, then I lived many years in New York, so that's where I got my accent from. But more importantly, I got my attitude from New York. So it's an accent and an attitude, which is even more fun.
And that's what matters, right?
I traveled and lived all over the world, and now, that is Southern California.
I love that, man. That's awesome. So you went from, you were born in Budapest and moved to New York, and then you went on to California. But somewhere in there, you became this amazing expert and wrote a book, right? C-Suite and Beyond?
Yeah, so I was an international expat, and I'm not sure if your audience knows who expats are, but expats are, I would say, the military equivalent of business. They send us overseas to fix problems. So I spent about 20 years overseas in Europe, in Latin America. That's where I actually lived in 6 different countries. But I've worked on every single continent except for Antarctica, and I'll pass on that one. So,
I think a lot of people would pass on that one, except for the penguins, right? Yeah. So, what did you tell? This is like expat, right? This is the first time I've ever heard of this too, which is odd. Yeah. So this is like an elite force of people that go overseas to fix business problems. Is this a specific? Is that the company expat, or is that like whatever? Is it a segment within corporations?
Well, it's both, right? It's basically corporations looking in their portfolio of who are the experts and where the problems are.
You said expert, E-X-P-E-R-T, or
no, it's an expat, and an expat basically says, I'm going to send this executive overseas, and then eventually they're going to come back to where they started from.
I got you. Okay. I thought a little bit of the New York accent was going to it's an expat,
But if you're not an expert, you're not going to be an expat either.
I would think not. Yes. How does one become this expat? I mean, is it like one day you're like knighted as such? What happens?
Look, in life, everything is not what you know, but who you know. So for me, my first expat assignment just happened to be, I was in corporate headquarters. And I was, everybody got to know my name in corporate headquarters. And when Eastern Europe opened up to multinational organizations, every single multinational looked inside their portfolio of employees and say, okay, who can speak the local languages? Because local languages are very important at the time. So out of 22,000 employees, four out of 22,000 spoke Hungarian. And I was in corporate headquarters, so everybody knew me. So they said, all right, we'll send Tom. If I was born in Poland, there's probably about 20 guys ahead of me that would have gone to Poland because they were more experienced than I was. But, then the expat world, once you get out there, it's kind of funny because you have a window of opportunity between 2 and 3 years. So they send you into fixing a problem. And then you either fix it in 2 to 3 years or you don't. If you fix it in 2 to 3 years, they say, attaboy, did a good job. We got something bigger and better for you. Or if you didn't fix it, they say, hey, Tom, it didn't work out. Sorry to see you go.
Dude, this sounds more like the Mafia than anything else. For real. What is it? What were some examples of these types of problems that you would fix or not?
Well, I was either a turnaround specialist or a startup specialist. So it was either going to Mexico, starting a new business, or it was going into Eastern Europe and fixing a business that was losing a lot of money. So it was always, hey, we have this. It usually started with a lunch. One of the senior executives would bring you into lunch, sit down for your lunch, and then you say, Tom, we've got this great opportunity for you, right? And then you kind of land in the country, and then you start doing start exploring that opportunity.
This is the Mafia for real. You're going here. You don't have choice about it at all. But we're going to frame it in a way that makes it sound amazing. But if you fail, you're dead to us. Okay, that's the Mafia, dude. Come on.
Yeah. Well, I had I would after my lunch, I would come home with my wife, and I would sit down with the family and say, Hun, we've got this great opportunity. and then every once in a while, my wife would say, you want to move where? So I actually said no once. I said no once to an opportunity. And the CEO he had like a little tantrum. He was like, how dare Tom say no to me? So he pouted for about 6 months, and then something else came along and it asked me again. And I said, okay, I'll take that one.
All righty. That's good that they didn't pass you by after saying no. Wow. Because like chop you off of the knees or anything like that. You're making me think that this is like some underground thing here or something. I don't know, man. But yeah, that's cool. So around, I'm looking at this, like you believe in servant leadership principles, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's based on biblical foundations, and I've got a good spiritual background and foundation too. Is that where your book stems from too? C-Suite and Beyond is with a lot of those principles of servant leadership.
Well, yeah, it's a lifetime of experience, and when I because I was an expat, I was constantly bouncing from church to church because every time you hit a new country, you got to find a new church. And one common theme that I found in all the churches that I attended in that local country where I lived there was this common theme of, there's the secular business world, which is the wrong way of doing things. And then there's the right way of doing things, which is the church. So that kind of bothered me. I said, look, there's no reason why you can't run a business on biblical principles. In fact, a lot of the leadership principles that we hear today, a lot of the corporate culture words that we hear today, a lot of the values we hear today, they're biblically based, and maybe some companies don't know that they're running their companies by biblically based principles, but they do. So that's why I kind of wrapped my head around it and writing this book and said, okay, well, if you take two companies and one, selling identical products, identical markets, one is run by biblical principles, the other one's not, I would propose that the one that's run by biblical principles will always be more successful.
Yeah, for sure. I believe that too. And I'm with you at the same time that there is a gap that exists between most of the church world and the business world and saying that the two can't mesh together. And I've seen that, and it's interesting because a lot of the people that are in churches and run churches have never run a business either. But there's
and I've seen a lot of dysfunctional churches, let me tell you.
For sure. Dude, there's so much of a business side to church too. You have income revenue that's coming in, you have expenses, you have payroll. You have to make sound decisions on where to go based on the amount of traffic, like literal foot traffic that you have, almost like a retail store. There's so many similarities that exist there, but the principles, the biblical principles are the ones that can actually elevate that, and they can exist in either the church world or the business world. It's mind blowing that it's like, oh, well, this is it. And then I love the advice sometimes that, a pastor will give a business person when they've never run a business person, or a business person will think, oh, the church should be run differently when they've actually never run a church, because there's a huge emotional toll that comes with being a pastor too. I've lived on both sides, so I can see both perspectives and see that both just don't see each other, man. They don't understand the other side.
And some of the things that I see in churches, shortcomings is, look, when you look at a church, most churches are, quote unquote, are an entrepreneur startup.
For sure. They just call them something different. That's all. They call it a plant rather than a startup.
Yeah, so it's a startup. A pastor started a church. The church grew, and grew. And look, the founder who's the pastor, is a charismatic speaker, but he doesn't understand how to run a business, right? So some churches that recognize that become successful because they actually bring in a board in. They bring in people who understand how to run businesses and let the pastor be the charismatic speaker that he is, right? The guys that kind of hang on and want to maintain control and really don't understand how to run a business, but they think to do, those are ones that don't do so good.
For sure. And there's interesting parallels too to the business world, because everyone can expect a CEO to understand how to do all those functions and everything too. But a CEO might not be an operations person. A CEO might not be a financial person. A CEO might be just the person to say, hey, just like the lead pastor, this is the direction that we're going. I know how to get us there, but I need everybody else to execute because I don't have the competencies in those areas. That's for you to decide and figure out and to tell me and advise me.
Absolutely.
I love the parallels there, man. So, I'm kind of wishing at some point there might be, I don't know, but if there was like an expat for churches, that would be fantastic. There's your next business idea, right? That's a $1 billion idea, but I don't know if very many churches would pay for it. But anyways,
look, there is expats for churches. They're called missionaries.
Yeah, for sure. Right on, my man. Right. So your book, let's dive into this here, right? Why did you write this thing? You've been doing this for so long. Did you write it while you were an expat? Did you write it after? Is this something that's been burning inside of you? Tell me the story of your book.
So the way the book was born was as a public speaker. Are you still there?
Oh, yep, you came back. There we go. Hey.
All right. Yeah. So as a public speaker, when you get up on stage, the best way to connect with audiences is through personal stories. So I was building the database of personal stories, and after a while, I realized, man, I got enough personal stories to write a book. So then I said, okay, well, how would I put this book together from all these personal stories that would make sense? So I kind of looked at my life and said, all right, well. When I was successful and things were working well, what was happening in my life, and when I was failing, when I was not doing well, what was happening in my life. So boiled it down to what I call the 4 keys of leadership success. And then I asked myself another question. I said, all right, now with these 4 keys, is that unique to me? Or if I look at some other business leaders or successful companies, do they also have those 4 keys in common? And the answer was yes. So I said, all right, well, makes sense. So I kind of put all my little personal stories, really supporting and illustrating those 4 keys. And that's the book.
Just right there, right? Way to summarize it. All right, anybody just go find Tom. Where can we find you online, Tom? And we can buy your book. I hope it'll take us long. I'm joking, man. But no. So yeah, you birthed your book out of public speaking. I get that. And I'm totally with you that when you're on stage, the way to really start to relate to the people that are listening to you so that they begin to build trust and say, oh, I want to listen to this person, is through the personal stories. And because not everyone's going to resonate with every single story that you say when you're on stage, of course, but it makes you more human, more approachable, more believable, more relatable when you tell the stories about your own life. Because even though it's a tactic when you're speaking, I use it too, and everyone's like, oh, is it fake vulnerability? No, it's actually utilizing vulnerability as a tool to say, hey, this is what I went through, and maybe you can grasp something out of the story, but it's going to lead into what I want to teach you today and bring value to you. So
absolutely.
You, when you're an expat, I'm sure it's almost like, I feel some days it's like almost every day, I'm on a stage or something like that, even working in a day-to-day in the business, whatever, but it's always training. It's constantly that way. And I feel that if you don't have any sort of like speaking within you, I don't know if you can necessarily be a COO. I don't know if you can necessarily be any kind of C-level whatsoever, because people need to hear from you. They need to hear that you're a real person. They need to understand, and you need to be able to communicate properly and inspire them. That's huge. Inspire them to carry out what we need to do for the organization. Did you ever see that disconnect when you were doing these things at all between the C-suite and the entire organization? Like there was just this block in between those levels?
Oh, absolutely. I think great leaders are charismatic leaders. Whether you're in business or outside of business. I say there's 3 levels of communication that I've seen in my life. And when I first started out in my career, I was on level 1. Level 1, you're informing. I would go into a conference room, I would do a presentation, and I would inform other people in that conference room of my ideas. Right? And I try to convince them why my idea was the right one and they should follow it. But that's never really effective, because that's kind of a monologue. And probably 90% of corporate presentations are in there. I mean, I've been in corporate presentations where, it's an international setting, so people are flying in and flying out, but I've heard people snoring in presentations.
Oh, Lord, me too, man. Yeah. Yep. Not in mine. They never fall asleep in mine. But I've been in the audience a lot and be like,
you can't blame the guy who he just spent 10 hours in a plane in a different time zone and here he's in a dimly lit conference room and he's snoring because the presentation is boring. It's not engaging, right? And 90% of the presentations are all like that. And I was like, when I first
87 slides with super fine print on it, and all it is just because the dude's unprepared to begin with. And those are really just their notes that they're throwing up there so they can stay on track. Oh my God, who's been there? I'm sure you've been there, man. That's when I want to sleep. Good God.
I had my boss do a presentation one time in a large audience, and I think he had like 105 slides. I mean, it was crazy.
Oh.
and then somebody asked a question after the 105 slides, and he goes, "Oh, I should have 106 slides because that answer never should have came out."
Holy mother! Good Lord.
But anyway, then you basically go to the second level of which is called communication. Right. And communication kind of gets the audience involved. It's more of the dialogue. You play with the audience a little bit. And I went from, the first level to the second level. And I remember I was doing a presentation in front of about 1,000 customers. Right. So it was pretty cool. It was, we rented out the Museum of Fine Arts and had a big, stage on there and tables and stuff. All our products were kind of intervened with the fine art display there, so it was pretty cool. And I thought I did a good presentation, but then I kind of looked back on it and I was like, well, heck, there was not one personal story in there. It was really like facts and figures and sales numbers and marketing jargon, and I thought I had it, but I didn't. Right? I kind of failed on that one because really it was level 2, and until you get to level 3. And whether you're doing a presentation because you're up on stage to a bunch of customers, or maybe you're doing a seminar on stage or a workshop, maybe you're public speaking, maybe you're in front of your employees, your C-suite of 6 or 7 direct reports in a conference room. But until you learn to engage them and start tugging on their hearts with stories that they can relate to, and like you said, you just mentioned this a little while ago, they feel that you're human, right? I mean, this is not the greatest story to share, right? But I remember many years ago we had a sales meeting, right? And we had, like all sales meeting, we had a great sales meeting. After that, we had a party and we were dancing and drinking until like 3 a.m. in the morning. And the bunch of sales guys made me do a bunch of tequila shots, which was a really big mistake.
That's the best way to start any sales meeting. Come on now.
But we overindulged. And the next morning, I woke up a little bit late with a pretty nasty hangover. And I talked to my sales director, Paul, and I said, man, I should just fire myself. And he goes, oh, what the hell? I mean, for the first time, Tom, the people saw as you human. Because I was like this, very proper business kind of guy, and everybody looked at me as, oh, Tom, he really understands what he's doing. He's the expat, blah, blah, blah. And then Paul said, look, the first time they really saw you as a human being and vulnerable. And that counted more than any other, direction or, whatever else I could have given that company.
I think that's the biggest lesson from Tom today, everybody. Do tequila shots to be relatable. Yes. Doesn't matter, right from the stage, whatever. That could be your shtick. Tom does it, you should do it too. That's awesome. Yes. Something though. Find something, right, to have that common ground with everybody.
Yeah, have the vulnerability. Absolutely.
You need to, because otherwise, especially with somebody with your stature, it's intimidating because when you're at a level, when you achieve a level of success, or, even at the beginning, whatever, there's still things that you've done that other people that haven't. And typically when you are brought in to be a public speaker or to be a coach, be an influencer, be a mentor, you are already positioned above everyone else that's in that room or above that individual that you're doing some one-on-one with. So you have to be able to not necessarily bring yourself down to them, but say, hey, here's some common ground that we have and we can build on it from there. If it's tequila shots, do tequila shots. That's fine. As long as it's not like some Jose Cuervo gold or some stupid crap like that. Come on now. You want to be relatable. Be like, that's where you can bring them up to your level, right? Make sure it's good tequila.
At the end of the day, it's we're human beings, right? We're not human doings, we're human beings. And we relate to each other through, experiences, other things. And early on in my career, I never got that, right? I was like, I almost had schizophrenic, personalities. At work, I was very professional. I was very responsible, integrity, delivering stuff on time, exceeding expectations. And in my social life, I was a party guy, right? I'd go out on Friday night and have a lot of fun, but I never mixed the two, right? I said, okay, well, this is professional life. I really don't want to have friends there. I'll have colleagues, and then I have my private life where I have my friends. And later on, I learned as I matured as a leader and as I matured as an executive and business guy to say, look, in fact, if you do not form relationships at work, you're going to fail. You have to form relationships. You have to spend time. You have to go away on a weekend or a week, and all the guys bring their wives. So the wives kind of get to hang out and say, okay, well, these guys work hard. They're real. The Federico that Tom talks about all the time. Well, he's a human guy. He's a nice guy. He likes to drink wine. He has fun. His wife is fun. So you build that.
Sounds like a Tinder account right there, man. Come on. Likes to drink wine. Have a nice one. No. Swipe right. There we go.
So yeah. So you kind of build that. You build that rapport, not just with your colleagues, but also with their families, with their kids. And if you build those relationships, those people will go to bat for you every time. If you don't build those relationships, they will not go to bat for you. And that's something that I learned, and I had to really have a paradigm shift as I became a more senior leader. That's the only way it's going to work.
When you're examining these companies, man, and going in to fix them at the startup or the shifting phase, I don't remember the term that you used. Did you find people that were in leadership roles that should never have been in leadership roles?
Absolutely.
How do you identify them, and how do you break, like saying you should have never been in this spot?
Well, it's most of the time it's not the person's fault, right? Most of the time, every corporation has a habit of taking somebody who's very good at skill sets and put him in a leadership position, and then not giving the tools to succeed. So they take a great salesperson and make him a sales manager or a sales leader, and don't teach him how to be a sales leader. The guy's a great salesperson, but doesn't understand how to lead people. So I don't think you were born as a leader. I mean, some people have better leadership, tendencies than others, but it's something that, just like you can learn how to sell, you can also learn how to lead. Just like you can learn how to market, you can learn how to lead. And many companies make the mistake of taking somebody who's very good at doing something and then put them into a leadership role, and they never had the experience, and they don't teach them how to become leaders of people. And so that's, I think, the biggest downfall. And I've seen that so many times in so many companies.
That's one of the dumbest moves, isn't it? I mean, just dumb, stupid everything is like your example is perfect because you see this a lot. I saw this a lot in retail also, man, because it was, when I was working for Best Buy for years, you could not be the GM of one of the retail stores unless you were a sales manager first, and that's great because the concept was we need the GM to focus on revenue. That makes a lot of sense, common sense, right? However, these people that were good at selling sometimes, a lot of times actually never really made good leaders and never really made good managers. It's almost like in hospitality too. You can have a server that's insane, right? I get it's still sales, I guess, but you know what? Always upselling, always adding on the sides, always adding on the desserts, always getting the aperitifs on there, always getting the digestifs added at the end, selling multiple bottles of wine and cocktails all over the place, right? And they're racking up these bills, making these amazing tips and these amazing incomes. Like, you should be a leader, you should be a GM in this restaurant. And then all of a sudden the restaurant's out of business because they didn't know how to inspire people. All they knew how to do, which is okay, is how to fill their own wallet, which is awesome because they fit in a good spot for that time being. But then people are left scratching their heads and they're like, well, I don't know, how did you work with them? Like the people that made the decisions, this is crazy, right? The people that made the decisions to say, you do this good, so you should lead.
Well, one of the situations I walked into where they hired me to be general manager of a company, and they were selling about 40 million and losing about 4 million or 40 million in sales. And then, when I went, like the previous general manager was a sales guy. And after about 2 weeks, I said, what's everybody else doing? He was running around the country selling huge deals. And, the other 100 salespeople, I don't know what the heck they were doing because, this one guy was, selling 80% of the volume. Wrongly, because he was selling at low prices and, giving away huge discounts just to hit volume targets. And it's just kind of going into that company and using those 4 keys that I mentioned in the book and kind of looking at it and say, all right, well, what's missing, right? Their vision was missing. They didn't really have a culture. They had a panic culture, right? They didn't have teamwork and the strategic plan didn't align with the vision. So really in 2.5 years, we went from 40 million to about 64 million in sales. And instead of losing 4 million, we're making about 3 million. So, and we did that in 3 years just by doing those 4 fundamental things. So you see it all the time. People, you see it hairdressers. Great hairdresser opens a hair salon. 2 years later, the hair salon's out of business because they were great hairdressers, but they couldn't run a hair salon. You see it all around you. Small businesses, entrepreneur businesses, large businesses, it's always the same.
Dude, and you hit on this. That's because they were never taught leadership. Yeah. Right. I believe with you that there are innate qualities, personality traits that you could be born with, but still, even with what I do, man, I've been through so many management classes, when I was working in corporate America and I've submitted myself and joined leadership things. I read leadership books because I always want to be somebody that's able to legitimately lead, not just the person that was good at doing something like we're talking here, but what do you feel as that first step? If somebody's, that great salesperson or that amazing hairstylist that's sitting there and being like, what, I'd love to open my salon one day. What's the first step for them to dive into this leadership exploration?
Well, there's 3 levels of leadership, right? The first level is understanding how to lead yourself, which, by the way, is not easy, right? Figuring out, what motivates you. Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you do the things that you're doing? So you really have to get pretty sure of who you are, what makes you tick. And, I've got some thoughts on, how to go about that. But the first step is being an effective leader of yourself. So then once you understand how to lead yourself, how to be successful yourself, how to motivate yourself, then you can start leading others where the first step of that is they have to buy into you as an individual, as a human being, right? If people don't buy into me, they're not going to follow me.
We're back to the tequila shots, man.
Yeah, go back to the tequila. And the third one is basically when you start developing other leaders. And a lot of people are afraid of that. A lot of people are afraid of that because once they take themselves out, they say, okay, well, if I develop really good leaders, what's going to happen to my job security? Right? I was talking to this young lady when I moved down to San Diego, and she was saying, yeah, Tom, I know exactly what you mean. She was working for this pool company at the time, spa pools. And she said, I had a boss. She was wonderful. She was great. The department was fantastic. We were firing on all cylinders, making all kinds of numbers. And then for one reason or another, she left. And then they brought in another leader, and that didn't work. Then they brought in another leader, that didn't work. And the whole department fell apart. So I said, that woman who you thought was a great leader wasn't really that great of a leader, because she got to the stage 2 really well, where she developed a lot of loyal followers. but she never took the time to develop future leaders in her department. So when she left the company and she was taken out of the picture, right, somebody in that team should have been ready to rise up to the top. It would have been her responsibility to make that happen. So she was an okay leader, but she wasn't really a great leader because she never bothered to develop other leaders. So I was never afraid of that. I mean, I worked for people who were afraid. In fact, the first time I got fired after 15 years, it happened because the guy was insecure. And, the company was rallying more around me than around him, and he was my boss. So that was a lesson for me to, about authority. And we can spend the whole podcast just on that lesson. But some people are insecure. They think, hey, if Tom is a better leader than me, or if I think somebody that works for me is a better leader than me, I should not be afraid to develop them, to mentor them, because one day, hey, I would love to work for somebody who one time worked for me, and if they're a better leader than me, God bless it. Why shouldn't I work for them? Right? They'll do a better job than me.
Yeah, that's a very secure position to come from too. But you're talking about ego right now, and that's a huge pull for a lot of people, because it comes down to like, what, am I not good enough? And the answer can simply be no. You're not good enough, but it doesn't mean that you won't be good enough. But right now, you're not good enough. And there's things that you have to do to develop yourself in order to be that person that can then lead others, to raise up other leaders underneath you, for sure. And that's an okay spot to be too. That's also the thing, is that it's okay to not be good enough right now, as long as you're able to take action and say, I'm going to be, and this is how I'm going to get there. Did you help people with that too, Tom, as far as bringing them up into that realm and crossing those thresholds of those different levels of leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned this, like Tom is a servant leader. Well, that's part of being a servant leader. If I just look at the back cover of my book, right? Back of my book, there's this gentleman that gave me a little endorsement in the back cover. Now he's the regional president for Latin America for Peet's Coffee, right? So he's running a $1 billion.
Love Peet's Coffee. I had some this morning.
So Peet's Coffee is owned by the John Banchese Group. I met Erie a long time ago when we worked under a different division of that company, right? But it says, this is his endorsement that I'm going to read. I've known Tom for many years, and he has helped me tremendously throughout my career. And he's one of the reasons of who I am and where I am today. This is his endorsement, right? Here's a guy that used to be a brand manager when I used to be a general manager in a company. And he just recently retired as the regional vice president or regional president of Latin America. And I think actually it was much bigger than Latin America, of $1 billion business, right? So if you pour into people, but you got to be selective, right? I mean, you can't pour into every person, because then you'll just be exhausted. So you have to kind of pick and say, all right, well, these 3 or 4 people, I believe in them. I see something in them. And that's, how I got my first break. I had a great boss, and he saw something in me. I don't know what it was, but he saw something in me and he poured into me. That made a big difference early on in my career. And it's something that, I've done, pouring into not everybody, but, selectively taking people and saying, okay, I'm going to pour into them over the next 2-3 years. It's not a 5-minute thing. And then see what happens.
That's awesome, my man. Tom, where can we find your book? Amazon?
Yeah, Amazon, Sweet. Barnes & Noble, anywhere online, yeah.
Beautiful. C-Suite and beyond. Tom, thank you for being on today, my man. I appreciate your insight into leadership. And I love these 3 thresholds that you have and crossing over to those things. And I've always said, too, that the last step of learning is teaching, right? And the last step of leadership is developing other leaders. My man, thanks for being on, Tom.
All right, thank you.